Welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome to this side event, which is titled Are We on Track? Where IDPC, the International Drug Policy Consortium, will be presenting our shadow report for the midterm review of the 2019 Ministerial Declaration on drugs. And we also have, in addition to the author of the report, several other esteemed speakers who will be reflecting on the report and its contents. Firstly, let me thank Switzerland for co-organizing this event with us today. And also we have several other member state co-sponsors: Canada, Colombia, Czechia, Germany, Mexico, Norway, Portugal, Uruguay, and the European Union. I also wanted to note that at the end of our event, so you have to stay till the end, we'll be providing coffee, tea, and refreshments, which I believe will be located just outside this room, and will also provide us with an opportunity for further discussion following the end of the panel. So yeah, I hope that we'll have time to hear from all the panelists and then still have a few minutes at the end for some questions. Let's see how we go. And without further ado, let me introduce His Excellency, Ambassador Raphael Nägeli, who's the permanent representative of Switzerland to the UN in Vienna, who will give us introductory remarks. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me start by thanking the International Drug Policy Consortium for gathering us here today to provide us with an overview of its assessment of the last 5 years of the implementation of our commitments that we have agreed upon in the 2019 Ministerial Declaration. We welcome this important contribution to our debates and deliberations we have these days. Switzerland is a strong supporter of civil society engagement, a strong supporter of multi-stakeholder approaches. They allow us to develop substance, to think ahead, and to have informed debates. I think that's a key and a crucial contribution to our debate discussions here. In this report, and this is a specifically important one, it is based on a survey of communities in different parts of the world. It brings us the views of those who work daily to address issues related to drug control, to provide health, social services to people in need, and who deliver prevention, treatment, and harm reduction services. This report is a telling collection of data and information. It reminds us of the complex ramifications of illegal drug markets. The work of the CND is important to a large array of actors involved in national drug policies. We are therefore very interested to listen today in the findings of civil society on the current state of affairs at the national and the local level. We are keen on learning which progress has been made since 2019 and what are the gaps, and I read there are many of them, what are the gaps we need to urgently fill to achieve the goal of international drug policy, to preserve the health and the welfare of humankind. Ahead of the midterm review on the Ministerial Declaration, this event is an opportunity to discuss openly a large array of issues we deliberate at the CND. While we do not endorse or agree with all of the recommendations contained in the report, we do most warmly welcome them as an important contribution that helps us in shaping our thinking, and thank those independent voices involved in the process for their diligence in keeping us accountable. Ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland strongly believes in the implementation through our national 4-pillar strategy of evidence-based drug policies that are based on human rights and are focused on reducing health-related and social harms. Our national strategy focuses, as mentioned, on 4 pillars. Those are prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and repression, and is based on a partnership approach where health and law enforcement authorities work hand in hand with civil society organizations to provide services to people who use drugs, to communities affected, and to the general population. As such, our federal organization makes us deeply aware of the importance of our partners from the civil society to inform us on the needs of the entire population and to help us providing services to respond to these specific needs. So civil society voices remind us of the important role of the CND, that the CND plays in influencing national and local drug policies, and the need to reach a balanced and a right-based commitment and engagements in the international level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And yeah, let me also reiterate our thanks for Switzerland's unwavering commitment to civil society engagement here at the CND over many years, in fact. So moving on to our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Marie Nougier. Marie is Head of Research and Communications at IDPC and was the lead author for this report. And Marie will present the report's key findings and recommendations towards the midterm review. Marie, you have the floor.
Thanks, Anne, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the launch of the report. So as Anne said, I'm one of the main co-authors for the report. Thanks, Adria. And yeah, in the next few minutes, I'll just give you an overview of some of the key findings of the report. Obviously, it will be short because I only have 10 minutes, but I encourage you to take a copy of the report to the back of the room. Before I start, I just wanted to thank my co-author, Adria Cots-Fernandez, who's over there, and the many civil society colleagues who have provided comments, inputs, and testimonies, and also the Swiss Federal Office of Public Health, without whom this report would not have taken place. So first of all, let me just see if that works or not. Okay, I might need to just say next slide. Sorry, Adria, it's just not working. So next. Thank you. So first of all, why did we decide to drive this shadow report? Our main objective is to support and inform the 2024 midterm review with a comprehensive evaluation of progress that has been made against the goals and the 12 objectives that were included in the 2019 Ministerial Declaration. On the basis of this evaluation, we then provide recommendations for the midterm review, but also much more broadly than that and forward-looking, we provide recommendations beyond 2024. Our second objective was to bring the data, research, analysis, and voices of civil society to the midterm review. We're a global network of more than 190 NGOs, and we really wanted to bring the breadth of expertise of our network to these discussions. Next. So in terms of methodology, we included a review of official UN and government reports and data, as well as civil society and academic research. But in addition to that, we also conducted a civil society survey amongst our membership because we wanted to assess what they had perceived as having changed since 2019. We also collected testimonies from people directly impacted by drug policies from different countries, including Ukraine, Lebanon, India, Malta, Brazil, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and many more. Next. So our first conclusion is that according to the World Drug Reports for 2019 and 2023, there has been an overall increase in the illicit cultivation, production, trafficking, and use of drugs. This is despite the billions of dollars spent every year to curb the market. The number of people who use drugs aged 15 to 64 has increased from 271 million to 296 million, while synthetic drugs, precursors, and PS have proliferated, in part as an unintended consequence of the expansion of drug law enforcement efforts. Next. Our second conclusion is that illicit drug economies continue to fuel acute violence and conflict, particularly in producing and transit countries in the Global South. Our civil society survey also shows that the perceived levels of violence that are associated both with the illegal drug market and with drug law enforcement has risen across the globe, including in consuming countries. Next. Our third conclusion is that people who use drugs continue to be disproportionately affected by health issues, and this is something that has really come across over the past couple of days here. The latest global data available on drug use-related deaths, unfortunately, still dates from 2019. That really shows the dire need for more recent data on this. The numbers then had reached 494,000 deaths in that year alone. Since then, there has been an alarming rise in overdose deaths, in particular in North America. People who use drugs also continue to face heightened risks of contracting HIV, hepatitis B and C, while access to quality and gender and age-sensitive harm reduction and treatment services remain severely limited, especially for people facing intersecting layers of vulnerability. Next. At the same time, there continues to be a shocking disparity in access to controlled medicines worldwide, with 82% of the global population having access to less than 17% of the world's morphine-based medicines. And you can see one of the testimonies here. More positively, since 2019, at least 18 countries have adopted laws or policies that facilitate access to cannabis-based medicines, while in 2020, cannabis was removed from Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention, thereby recognizing its therapeutic value. Next. Very problematically, however, drug policies continue to be associated with widespread human rights violations, ranging from the death penalty to extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests and detention, cases of torture, including in the name of treatment, and a range of discriminations on the basis of race, gender, class, and age, as well as a wide number of violations of economic, social, and cultural rights. These abuses have become increasingly recognized and highlighted by UN human rights bodies, and that has culminated with the 2023 OHCHR report on that topic. Next. Many of these violations are related to the ongoing over-reliance on punishment and prisons. The number of people who are deprived of liberty globally has grown from 10.74 million in 2018 to 11.5 million in 2023. And over 1 in 5 people in prison continue to be incarcerated for drug offenses. And that proportion is significantly higher when we talk about women deprived of liberty. In addition, hundreds of thousands more are subjected to compulsory drug detention or internment in private rehab centers. Positively, however, new jurisdictions have adopted some form of decriminalization since 2019, bringing the total number to 66 jurisdictions in 40 countries, with many more having adopted or considering other alternatives to criminalization or punishment. Next. Beyond decriminalization, 8 countries now have legal regulation in their territories for substances included in the 1961 Single Convention. And this means that the number of people living in jurisdictions with some form of legal regulation has increased from 123 million in 2019 to 294 million in 2023, with more pilots and bills being rolled out or discussed in other parts of the world. The issue, though, is that the tensions between legal regulation and the UN drug control treaties has not been adequately discussed or addressed at the UN. Next. Now, moving on to development issues at the CND, there have been some progress in terms of broadening up the concept of alternative development, but there has been limited progress on the ground for affected communities, and women in particular contribute to be left behind and marginalized. Our analysis and civil society surveys show that the legal regulation of plants like coca, opium, or cannabis for medical, industrial, or recreational purposes is a development opportunity in traditional cultivation areas, but only if traditional farmers are meaningfully included in these policies. Next. Thank you. And my final conclusion is on civil society space. There has been quite a lot of progress in ensuring civil society engagement at the CND that should be recognized here. And this is despite all the setbacks created by COVID-19, but also ongoing pushback from a small but vocal group of member states here in Vienna. At national level, however, the situation is concerning, and many NGO colleagues have reported shrinking civil society space due to authoritarianism, punitive drug policies, foreign agent laws, restrictions in funding, and more. Next. As part of our analysis, we've also identified various blind spots, or basically issues that were not covered by the 2019 Ministerial Declaration, but that should be prioritized going forward. Examples include the need to recognize the potential of legal regulation as a tool to break the links between drug markets and organized crime, the role of surveillance technologies and their impacts on human rights, the need to ensure racial justice and also to address the tensions between the drug control treaties and the rights of indigenous peoples, or the environmental impacts of drugs, but also drug policies. So next, I will conclude with some recommendations for the midterm review, again, bearing in mind that we have many more recommendations within the shadow report itself that focus specifically on UN bodies and on longer term systemic reforms. So first of all, the debates and outcome documents should reflect the normative developments that have taken place at the CND, at the UN General Assembly, and at the Human Rights Council, including new language on harm reduction, on racial discriminations, the rights of indigenous peoples, and the rescheduling of cannabis, amongst others. Secondly, and based on our recommendations, it seems very clear that we need to urgently move away from drug-free goals and language and align drug policies much more closely with human rights and with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Our findings and blind spots also show that the challenges identified in 2019 should be revised to cover new developments that have emerged since 2019. And we provide a list of these possible challenges for the period 2024 to 2029 in our shadow report for your consideration. And we link every single one of them to relevant sustainable development goals. Next. Fourthly, we urge you to acknowledge the existence of legally regulated markets. They are a reality and it's not going anywhere. But we also urge you to initiate much needed discussions on whether and how to modernize the UN drug control regime. Fifth, and on the basis of the OHCHR report, we urge you to make sure that the outcome document calls on transformative change for drug policy. And finally, we urge you to promote and protect civil society participation. This includes consulting NGOs as you're elaborating your positions for the midterm review, and also including civil society in your own delegations in March 2024 and beyond. So I will stop here. If you can put the last slide, Adria, that includes a link to the shadow report. Thanks so much for your attention. I invite you to read the report and send us any comments and look forward to your thoughts about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marie. And I think you can all see how much thought and work has gone into this report. And I really hope that it is a meaningful contribution towards the deliberations for the midterm review in March. So moving on to our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Paula Aguirre. She's the director of Elementa Derechos Humanos in Colombia. And Paula will reflect on key conclusions from the shadow report and the experience from Colombia regarding the impact of militarization and the rights of indigenous peoples, as well as options for reform. Paula, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anne. Before I begin, I salute my colleagues and I want to thank IDPC, Anne, Marie, Adrian, for the invitation to participate in this conversation and for taking on the challenge of building a shadow report in the face of the midterm review, and that it should become a roadmap for all UN offices, national and international decision makers, civil society, and activists. Regarding the key highlights on the shadow report, I would like to start with the importance that this year we can see among the sources the report on drug policies and human rights of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, which also finds great points in common with the blind spots in the shadow report. Now, from the point of view of the Colombian situation, the shadow report itself becomes a source of dialogue to articulate internal efforts with the needed to position the international challenges of the coming year as a fundamental year for a drug policy, as mentioned in the beginning of the report. This taking into account the launching a couple of months ago of the new drug policy that is projected for the next 10 years and that had a broad participation in its elaboration. In addition, the Colombian drug policy is based on the fundamental recognition that the strategies that have been used for decades have not worked and, on the contrary, have perpetuated a crisis that has directly affected the guarantee of human rights in the country, very much in line with the shadow report, with the report of the High Commissioner's Office, and with the final report of the Colombian Drug Commission. It is also worth mentioning that the final report of the Truth Commission has a whole chapter of findings on drug trafficking as a protagonist of the armed conflict and as a factor of persistence. This chapter returns to the starting point of the shadow report, and based on the Colombian context and the identification of the transversal role played by the misnamed war on drugs, points to a very concrete and courageous recommendation. I'm going to quote it. In the immediate term, it is urgent to adopt a human rights and public health approach in the policy against cultivation, consumption, and rationalizes the use of criminal action against the weakest links in the chain that allows, among others, the overcome structural problems of poverty, exclusion, and stigmatization, and to implement a proposal towards the rigorous regulation of the market and consumption under state and international control in a process in which Colombia can and should play an inspirational and leading role. Very much in line, again, with the shadow report. As for the weakest links mentioned in the report of the Truth Commission, it is necessary to speak of Colombia's ethnic communities. Those who, due to the war model adopted by the prohibition system and resulting in extreme militarization as a tool for territorial control, have suffered the consequences in every possible way. Affections to their ancestral territories, violation of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, criminalization, stigmatization, contaminations of rivers, and lack of recognition of ancestral relationship with plants, such as the coca leaf, among others, of course, are some of the impacts that indigenous communities in our country have had to face. All this while glyphosate or Roundup rain on them from airplanes. Now, in terms of recommendations, I would like to return to the legacy of the Truth Commission, which everyone should know. It is important to understand that the demilitarization of policies must also include progress in the model of regulation and legalization of substances, given the failure of prohibitionist policies and the very high cost that Colombia has paid for drug trafficking, where the war on drugs itself has become a factor in the persistence of the conflict. Likewise, the demilitarization of the state response to crops, territories, and affected population must go hand in hand with a series of comprehensive measures based on the recognition of the damage caused, the effects generated over the years, and a commitment to reparation measures that meet the standards of guarantee of non-repetition that have permeated the international human rights system, and that, of course, in the case of ethnic communities, comply with differential approaches that are able to respond to the gravity of what has been experienced for decades. Thank you very much. And I want to invite you all to read the report.
Thank you so much, Paula. So our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce, is Ruby Lawlor. Ruby is the Executive Director of Youth Rise, and Ruby will also reflect on the shadow report from her own perspective, and especially in discussing how young people are affected by drug policies, including in accessing harm reduction interventions. Ruby, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction, and to IDPC for inviting us to be part of this event. So to introduce Youth Rise a bit further, we are an international network of young people who use drugs and/or young people who are affected by punitive drug policies worldwide. I want to commend IDPC for the production of this shadow report as a key document that highlights how far behind we are in achieving global commitments. It is also really appreciated to see the key challenges that young people who use drugs face throughout the report, highlighting the severe data gaps, barriers to, and inaccessibility of harm reduction and its impact on us, and need for policy reform to end the disproportionate impact of criminalization on young people. This week, we have heard many concerns around young people and drugs in statements from member state delegations and UN bodies, and we note the emphasis on prevention efforts, too often not rooted in evidence and resulting in further stigma, decriminalization, harm, and marginalization of young people who use drugs. prevention will always miss some young people. And despite global efforts to prevent us from using drugs, many of us still do. Therefore, there needs to be significantly more focus on how to protect us from possible drug-related harms and how to ensure we have access to life-saving harm reduction and treatment services. There is so much emphasis and funding on preventing us from using in the first place or stopping us once we started, that efforts to help us mitigate the risks once we begin are left behind at all levels of decision-making, while funding for harm reduction overall remains scarce. We know that drug use is ever growing amongst young people. It's been discussed in the past 2 days, and recent findings show that there is a 50% higher average risk of HIV and HCV acquisition for young people who inject stimulant drugs, which highlights that punitive drug policies are not serving their intended purpose and in fact causing significant harms to our population. And today, I want to respond to these concerns by highlighting key outcomes and recommendations from the very recent youth consultations that was coordinated by UNODC, UNICEF, the World Health Organization, Input, and YouthRise just under 2 weeks ago. So the youth consultation brought together experts from academia, civil society, and UN bodies to provide the most recent research on drug use amongst young people, the impact of policies on the achievement of our health and human rights, and provided insights about the realities, challenges, and barriers faced by young people who use drugs. The key points and recommendations raised were that there is a severe lack of granular age, sex, and locality disaggregated data on young people who use drugs, and the need to remedy this through a variety of approaches at the country level, and that there is little to no meaningful engagement of young people and young people who use drugs in this drug policy and harm reduction program design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Now, I want to note here our continued concern with the UNODC Youth Forum, which is hailed as the voice of young people within the CND. We are quite concerned about the opaque selection process for these youth delegates, while the content discussed in this forum is mainly focused on prevention instead of the full spectrum of care, including harm reduction. We also are concerned that civil society and youth-led organizations consisting of young people like YouthRise are not permitted to present about the realities of drug policies on young people at this forum. Therefore, the presentation by the Youth Forum delegates that happens each year around the last day of CND should not be taken as a true reflection of youth as a whole. The Youth Forum requires reform to be meaningful engagement, something that I'm happy to discuss further outside of this panel discussion with any of you. The final day of the consultation ended with a session on bringing harm reduction to drug education, which is highly relevant to the past 2 days' discussions, as member states and UN bodies have highlighted their efforts at drug education. It is evident that the current focus of most school-based drug education curricula solely focuses on abstinence and prevention and fails to reach many young people. And this should be complemented by harm reduction education, which provides accurate information about drugs, their effects, and their risks, and strategies to effectively mitigate these risks and promote health and safety. Evidence presented during this discussion showed that in schools that have implemented such a curricula, namely the Stanford University's Safety First Real Drug Education for Teens program, are now seeing a decrease in substance use among students who participated, and increased knowledge among students about how to mitigate risks from drugs. It also must be noted that such harm reduction focused drug education should not be limited to classroom settings and must be extended to meet young people where they are at, but also means that we need to remove age barriers to accessing health, harm reduction and treatment services, and to ensure that these services are youth-friendly and accessible. Finally, and as IDPC's Shadow Report highlights, in addition to better age-sensitive health interventions, young people and young people who use drugs need decriminalization and further drug policy reform to eliminate stigma, discrimination, and barriers hindering our access to harm reduction and treatment services. We need to collect age disaggregated data on young people who use drugs by young people who use drugs, and we need meaningful engagement of young people throughout the entire processes of decision-making, policy and program design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. We are here ready to help achieve this, and we cannot be left behind any longer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruby. I think both Ruby and Paula have really demonstrated the absolute importance of having the perspective of civil society shared, bringing the accountability that the ambassador also mentioned in his opening remarks, and really broadening out this debate and showing us where, as Marie pointed out in her presentation, some of the blind spots are and continue to be. So thank you both so much. Moving on, we now have the first of two speakers who are with us from UN entities. First up, I have Zaved Mahmood, who's the advisor on human rights and drug policy from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Zaved will also reflect a bit on the human rights dimensions of drug policy, reflecting on some of the key elements we raised in our shadow report, as well as highlighting the excellent recent OHCHR report on this same topic. Zaved, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. And also I'd like to thank IDPC and Switzerland to organize that event and inviting OHCHR to participate and discuss human rights related issues which had been highlighted in the IDPC shadow report. First, I would like to speak about some issues which has been mentioned in the report, the positive aspect of the human rights with regard to drug policy. We have seen that positive progress in the General Assembly resolution last year. Also, we have seen that human rights mechanism from Geneva increasingly involving in the discussion of drug policy, which has been demonstrated by the Human Rights Council recent resolution, which was adopted by consensus at the Human Rights Council in April this year, which identify different aspects, including for the first time at the Human Rights Council, recognized the importance of the harm reduction measures for people who use drugs. Also in this resolution, in the operative paragraph particularly, several substantive issues has been identified and asked member states to advance those issues. This includes alternative to incarceration, as well as alternative measures, including education, different programs, social integration of people who use drugs, treatment, gender-sensitive drug policy, age-sensitive drug policy, youth as well as older people, that they need special attention with regard to drug policy, marginalized population, including indigenous people or people of African descent, how to address their concern and issues related to drug policies. As well as this resolution emphasize the importance of the civil society into the drug policy debate and discussion. And I'm pleased to see that IDPC and other civil society organizations actively involved in CND, as well as at the Human Rights Council deliberation and debate. We appreciate that. That leads me to the next issue, which I would like to highlight, that in the report, which has been mentioned by different colleagues here, which was submitted to the Human Rights Council pursuant to Human Rights Council Resolution 52/24. In this report, we have highlighted various concerns. But before we move to that concern, I would like to also acknowledge the report is based on contribution from the member states. We called upon member states and other stakeholders to provide inputs for this report. We have received large number of input from the member state, as well as from civil society and other stakeholders. We thank all of you for your contribution. In relation to this report, we also analyzed the all contribution provided by the UN Human Rights Mechanism, different special procedure mechanism, as well as treaty bodies, their deliberation with regard to drug policy. We have identified 340 recommendations by these treaty bodies and special procedure from different member states. We take note of those contributions or recommendation of the human rights treaty bodies, as well as we take note of the resolution of the Commission of Narcotic Drugs, report of the International Narcotic Control Boards, and the publication by UNODC, UNS, and WHO, we have also examined and noticed that these bodies were directly involved in the drug policy related issues, increasingly acknowledging the importance of the human rights issues. We have seen that has been reflected in the Commission of Narcotic Drugs resolution, as well as INCB reports. We have noticed that, and definitely with other UN agency, we are working to promoting human rights and public health in the context of drug policy under the umbrella of UN common system, UN common position on drug related matters. That also we have noticed that IDPC report acknowledges this positive development. Now let me highlight the reports, our reports, which we will be also presenting day after tomorrow in a side event, which is organized by a large number of member states, including Switzerland, Colombia, Canada. I'm not going to list all of you, sorry for that. But with regard to key concern which we have identified, we can see the mirror of the Human Rights Council resolution. Human Rights Council resolution asked member states to take a step for enhancing treatment and harm reduction. But in our research and the report, we found that there is a lack and unequal access to treatment and harm reduction globally. This is one of the key concerns. I noticed that also this is IDPC also provided that in their report. Second issue, we have identified over-incarceration and prison overcrowding related to the drug-related offenses. 1/5 prison population are drug-related offenses in the world now we have. Third issue, we have identified the use of the death penalty for drug-related offenses. In last 2 years, we have seen that increase of the drug-related offenses, but also we have seen some positive development. For example, in Malaysia, mandatory death penalty has been removed, which is now judges has the discretion. In Malaysia, they are going through a resentencing of almost 900 cases. Their resentencing process is going on currently. Also, we have seen after our report produced, the Pakistan has removed the death penalty for drug-related offenses, along with other 11 drug-related offenses. Last 3 issues which we have identified in the report, that is challenge in humanitarian and other crisis setting related to the drug control, challenge related to the right to a healthy environment, which is recognized by the General Assembly as a right, healthy environment as a right in 2021. So that also we looked at it. And then war on drugs, which also mentioned by our colleague from Colombia, and militarization of drug control efforts. I don't want to go to the details on the recommendation. You will see in our report, and some of them also reflected in the IDPC report. And obviously we'll be discussing further on this report on 7th December in this room. We welcome you to come, and thank you very much for inviting us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Zaved. And finally, for the final panelist, I'm very delighted that UNODC could also be here with us today. So I'm introducing Tatiana Jehl, who's a drug policy officer. And yeah, Tatiana, we'd love to hear your reflections on IDPC's shadow report, as well as perhaps UNODC's position on the upcoming midterm review. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity afforded to UNODC to speak at this event, an important event which sees the launch of a report of civil society organizations, which aims to contribute to the midterm review, which is an important landmark in the efforts of member states to take stock of the implementation of all international drug policy commitments. Allow me to provide some reflections on behalf of UNODC. According to the 2023 World Drug Report, the world drug problem continues to have a negative impact on many aspects of our society, be it on the health, welfare and well-being, on security, human rights, and on development. Individuals, families, wider communities, government organizations, regions, and the environment has felt its negative consequences. The problem is global, it is complex, it's multifaceted, and the challenges associated with it are persistent and they are evolving. And member states have acknowledged this as a fact, including in the most recent 2019 Ministerial Declaration. With the nature of transnational organized crime and cross-border trafficking, the problems are shared, and so should our responses. The shadow report presented today acknowledges the magnitude of the challenge faced and offers some solutions and recommendations. UNODC welcomes that the report calls for more recent, reliable, and comprehensive data, and we will continue to reiterate the importance of basing any policy decisions on good quality data and on scientific evidence. However, narratives and perspectives on solutions to the drug problem may differ in the same way as the nature and scope of the problem itself. Circumstances of countries differ, and it is important to be cognizant of such realities in proposing solutions to such a complex problem. UNODC field offices span across 137 physical locations on the ground. This makes this organization receptive and sensitive to differing national realities, perspectives, and challenges, but always respectful of the 3 international drug control conventions, international law, and the UN pillars of peace and security, human rights, rule of law, and development, with none less or more significant than the other. The full respect for the international legal framework and adherence to the mandates given to UNODC by member states has allowed this organization to build strong working relationships also with other parts of the UN system, as well as with other international organizations, based on the principle of complementarity and avoiding overlapping activities. Distinguished participants, it is important to adopt narratives that engender constructive engagement, seek common ground, while being anchored in solid scientific evidence and on a comprehensive and balanced approach. The conventions continue to provide flexibility for addressing several issues raised in the shadow report, including on international cooperation in addressing organized drug-related crime, ensuring availability of controlled substances for medical and scientific purposes, and in providing for alternative measures to convictions such as treatment, rehabilitation, and care. And they continue to be, together with other relevant international instruments, the cornerstone of our responses. To conclude and sum up, UNODC reiterates the importance to follow scientific evidence on what works, to embrace the realities on the ground, and to put people at the center of what we do. We hope that this and many other perspectives will lead to solutions which are uniting, yet rather than divisive, evidence-based rather than ideological, and pragmatic and not theoretical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. So actually, I'm happy to report we will have a few minutes to open the floor for questions and comments before coming back to our final speaker for closing remarks. So do I have any questions or comments from the floor for Marie or any of our other panelists? Yeah, please come to the mic. Thank you.
Can you... No, because
we're streaming it, so we need you just to speak into a mic. Sorry.
Thank you, Diego. Then I'm stealing that microphone. Quick question to Ruby, because we're wondering whether we should engage in this youth, and sorry, I'm representing the European Union, for those of you who don't know me, whether we should engage in this youth forum or not. Actually, I get questions from member states, and I think it's a bit ambivalent. On the one hand, you have outlined the problems with that youth forum as it exists. On the other hand, if we only leave the space to others, then that, I mean, it's a reality that it takes place and that these voices are heard. So what is your advice? Thanks.
So I think on the country level, it's important that the selection process is clearer, so and more representative of a broader range of youth. It's hard, I mean, I can't say whether to disengage from it or not, but I think if engaging as member states, it's really important to make sure that you're getting the young people who have felt the impact of the war on drugs the most in whatever way that is, and make sure that they're able to come and present what that reality is for them, so that it is included in that statement that comes in the last day or so of C&D. And really, I think also equipping the young people with the knowledge of the impact they do have with their voice in this forum is also pretty important. I think that's on the member state level. And I think if you're going to be bringing young people, make sure it's young people who have been affected. And then, I mean, at the UNODC level, I think there's a lot to do on the content in regards to having a broader range of topics discussed at the forum. But yeah, that's really all I can say on the member state level. I don't know how to advise on whether to disengage or not. It's hard to figure out the best approach. But just be careful with who you're selecting, I think. Yeah, while having an open process as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ruby. Yes, please. And please do introduce yourself when you take the mic. Thanks.
Hello, hi. I'm Jofi from the Permanent Mission of Singapore. First, let me thank IDPC very much for the report. I only had a chance to skim through it very quickly. It's a thick report. It's full of meat. Managed to read the first part of the recommendations. I think you're probably familiar with my delegation's position, but let me say this, that I think it's actually very important, whatever your view on the drugs control issue, to listen to everyone else's view. And so actually, we're going to go through this report and every other sort of report that comes out very carefully, because we're actually interested in hearing what you have to say. We may not have the same perspectives, but I think it's actually very useful to understand what the other side's considerations are, if you want to call it that. I don't like to talk about sides, but let's just ease of reference, right? And to have an understanding of why certain approaches are being advocated. I think that's actually very important to understand, especially when we're talking about trying to be forward-looking. So this is it's a thick report. I haven't had a chance to go through it, as I said, but I think it's useful. So thank you for that. I'm sure there will be plenty of discussion as we move towards March next year. I think that's important, and I think we should have that discussion. I think the one thing I would say, though, is that, and let me just say also that stakeholders have a very important role to play, because you have a different perspective. You know, member states come in. Some of us are policymakers, some of us are diplomats, and so I think we approach the issue of drugs policy, drugs control from very different perspectives. And so, having heard the different speakers here, I actually think it was very useful to hear the breadth of comments. I think the one thing I would say, and I do note that next week, I think it's next week, there's a commemoration in Geneva for the UDHI 75th anniversary. We just had the High Commissioner at our Forum of Small States dialogue in Geneva, and he spoke about it. And I say this because, you know, multilateralism is at a difficult point with geopolitical developments, and we spend so much time trying to advocate our views that we, I think, probably don't focus enough on trying to build common ground. And so I think it's important for us as we move forward to talk about the midterm review and looking at the next 5 years, to obviously advocate our positions, but also where we can, to see where we can actually make progress to addressing this problem and trying to push the envelope there. So I just wanted to say that, you know, we're very, I've signed up for your newsletter, incidentally. I'm actually very interested in seeing what other ideas that you have, but really happy to actually engage colleagues with different points of view. And, you know, we advocate engagement, regardless of what we think about other people's positions. And I just did want to say that youth delegates are important. There are many different selection processes. I think that's a fact, we know that. But let's hear the views of people who do come, and then let's just try to expand that circle. And, you know, civil society should keep on speaking, and we're happy to listen. So thank you very much for the report, and thank you to the young speakers here. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments, and thank you for being with us. Marie, would you like to, any responses?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank you for these comments. I mean, I think, you know, when we put together a shadow report like this, and the reason why we published it now in December rather than in March is because we want this to be a starting point for discussion. So very happy to engage, very happy to have this conversation, very happy to bring in members of the network from Asia to have this conversation and from other parts of the world. And thanks for making the link also with Geneva. I mean, one of the key recommendations from the report is to have much more coherence within the entirety of the UN system on what drug policy should look like and how it feeds into the broader UN goals of ensuring protection for human rights, ensuring development and security for all, and health. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Marie. I have time for one last comment or question. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So actually then we'll move to our final speaker, who's going to provide the closing remarks. Delighted to have with us today Ambassador Lawlor, who's the permanent representative of Colombia to the UN in Vienna. Laura, you have the floor.
Well, good afternoon. I would like to thank IDPC for convoking this event, and it's a pleasure to be sitting here with the ambassador from Switzerland, my new friend, and civil society, national and international civil society. Thanks for being here, Paula. So the first thing I'd like to say is that, of course, Colombia's view is that the international drug regime failed. And I think Colombia's new drug policy responds to the findings of the report and is in line with its spirit and is already implementing most of the recommendations. And be assured that we will take a hard look at the ones we are not yet implementing, and we will consider it. I'd like to concentrate on a few points. Our new policy is people-centered, based on human rights, and puts civil society at the very, very center of the formulation and the implementation. We have done 1 year of consultations before coming up with our report. We went everywhere, all around the country. We talked to coca leaf growers. We talked to urban dwellers, we talk to peasants, we talk to pretty much everyone, including drug users. We do not want to forget drug users either. We pretty much talk to everyone. And Colombia is committed to keep this dialogue with civil society at the national level and contribute to stop the shrinking of the space for civil society that the report emphasizes. The second point I would like to make is that our new drug policy is human rights based, and my delegation is frankly flabbergasted by some things that I've been seeing, that we have been seeing in Vienna. One UN authority undertakes research and drafts a report on drugs and human rights. We co-sponsored the resolution, and we are very committed to that report. For us, that report is the beginning of a conversation. That's it. It's not an imposition, it's the beginning of a dialogue. And one UN authority somewhere else decides to impede the flow of that conversation. We want that human rights report to be known in Vienna. We want to discuss, and we want human rights to be an important element of the formulation of the international drug policy. A third point I'd like to make, and this is something that the report emphasizes, and I don't think we talk enough about this here in Vienna, is about how we frame the discussion about some elements of the international drug regime. We think we do not need to be scared of the word decolonization. And I think we need to frame the question of the scheduling of the coca leaf in that context. Fourth, I'd like to say something about the environment. In Colombia, we suffered the environmental impact of a failed drug policy. And we want to propose that we explore the impact on the environment on international drug policy. This is something that is a debt we have, and we would like to move forward on that front. Finally, I'd like you to leave with this message. Colombia believes that we are talking at each other, not to each other. And I am actually absolutely delighted by the intervention of the delegation of Singapore, because I think this is what we need. We need to converse. Even though we might not agree, we need to converse. We need to keep the spirit of dialogue. And we are committed to doing so. But in doing so, we will be good players, but we cannot give up our narrative, because our narrative results of decades of putting our debts is decades of military intervention in Colombia because of the drug situation. So what does this mean in the end? In the end, to tell you, to put it simply, in Spanish, we have an expression that says, a veces perder es ganar un poco. We believe that by being sincere about what we went through so many decades, even though we know we will not persuade everyone, but we believe if we make everyone understand what we suffered, we are gaining quite a bit. And our commitment to everyone in Vienna is we are a peace-loving country, we respect international law, and we are always open to dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And that's a really wonderful note to end on. I think, we are here because we want to engage in dialogue. Our report that we're presenting to you today is really about encouraging dialogue. As civil society, we really want to bring the reality into this debate. We took a lot of perspectives from our network, from around the world, from their perspectives, and brought it into this report to share with you about what the impact of drug policies on the ground has meant for them and for their lives. And I think I encourage all of you to keep welcoming civil society and community representatives to come here, especially people with lived experience, especially people who use drugs, farmers of subsistence crops, and really to hear from them about what policies mean for them in the ground and whether it's working or not. These debates don't happen in a vacuum, and I really urge all of you to remember that. I hope this report will be an important contribution for the midterm review process. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for being here. Also, I need to express my thanks to Marie Nougier and Adria Cots-Fernandez for their incredible work in putting this report together. So just a reminder, the report is, I think some hard copies might be left, but it's also available online. And please join us for tea and coffee just outside, I think, to the left of the room. So yeah, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks.